Welcome to the Friday edition of Forecast Lab. In the tropics today, we see a very spectacular example of sun glint, where the sun reflects off lakes, rivers, and oceans directly to the satellite, and also surrounding that, a very large reflection that follows it. This larger area is easily mistaken for dust, so you need to always be looking out for it. Dust does not travel from right to left that quickly. Anyway, August is here. One more full month of summer, then we'll be making that very slow transition into fall. In the tropics, very, very quiet weather in the Atlantic, which is good news for the people on the Gulf Coast. A little bit different story out there in the Pacific, a couple of tropical storms, but none of these are going to be affecting Hawaii or the West Coast. Here is Tropical Storm Gil, almost hurricane strength. It is moving westward. And I did want to ask one bit of trivia. Up here is the Gulf of California. What was the worst hurricane on record within that water body? Of course, the water temperatures in there are very warm. So is that capable of supporting a Category 4 or Category 5 storm? Post your guesses in the comments, and we'll talk about that on Tuesday. On the surface map this evening, we've got a huge change in the northeastern U.S., a large 1028 millibar high coming out of Canada and bringing with that colder, drier air. Not just 70-degree temperatures, but also dew points in the 40s and 50s. And that air is flowing down into Texas, Arkansas, Tennessee, and further south along this boundary, numerous showers and storms all the way from the Carolinas to Texas. In the southwest, the monsoon continues to be active, and further to the west, wildfires are out of control. We'll take a look at that shortly. We take a look at the northeastern U.S. What do we see here? The predominant flow is from north to south. You can see that cool air over the lakes, going south, crossing the shoreline, and coming inland, bringing cooler air to places like Chicago and Cleveland. Further south, we hit that frontal boundary. We saw that on the surface analysis in this area. And further south, we pick up the unstable air, the rich tropical moisture, and the unstable columns. And that's producing these convective anvils right there across northwestern North Carolina. In the southeastern U.S., definitely a mix of precipitation and hot weather. The good news, no extreme heat warnings in the southeast. The bad news, some heat advisories remain in effect. Advisories, of course, are a low-grade type of alert. Those heat advisories are in effect today for eastern and north Florida, basically in this area here, the southeastern half of Georgia, and into parts of South Carolina. We also have additional heat advisories across the deep south, roughly from Monroe, Louisiana, to Birmingham and Montgomery. Heat indexes there could be up to 110. However, the actual high temperatures will be in the low to mid-90s. So obviously we're dealing with some sweltering humidity. And it's probably a little bit hard to see, but that's going to be a marginal risk for severe weather from the Storm Prediction Center that extends from about Jacksonville, Mississippi, across Atlanta, Macon, and over to the Carolinas. The main threat there is going to be isolated strong storms with damaging wind gusts. Pretty much no potential for tornado or large hail. We've already had severe thunderstorm warnings around the Charlotte and Mooresville area this afternoon. Flood watches on the coast near Jacksonville and also in the Blue Ridge Mountains. In the southern plains, a mix of temperatures, 80s in Oklahoma and the panhandles to 100s in south central Texas. We're expecting 100 degrees at San Antonio, 101 at Austin, 101 at College Station. This morning we had flash flood warnings for the city of Tulsa. They got about 1 to 2 inches of rain. Flood advisories covered parts of northeastern Oklahoma from Bristow to Choteau. On the high plains, a flood watch is in effect for all of northeastern New Mexico, Clayton, Tucumcari west to Santa Rosa and the Sangre de Cristos. Numerous showers and storms expected in that area this afternoon and evening, and they'll produce rapid runoff. The northern plains looking fairly calm as that polar air flows in out of Canada, accompanied by some wildfire smoke. Quite a bit of it there around Thunder Bay out to Marquette. Highs were in the 70s from Minnesota to almost all of the Dakotas and Nebraska, but 80s were redeveloping on the high plains from Denver to Sheridan and Glasgow, and with that, a few thunderstorms, mostly on the higher terrain, but this little isolated storm north of Sturgis is an exception. There's a tornado risk this afternoon around the Sterling area into the Pawnee grasslands. That is going to be in a slight risk area covering this region right there. We already have a severe thunderstorm watch for parts of Colorado and Wyoming. A flood watch is in effect further north with this thunderstorm cluster there in South Dakota. We also have flood watches in effect for north central Montana today and tonight, including the Helena, Great Falls, Lewistown, and Havre area, as another wave of showers and storms will move through the area. The Central Rockies under a couple of new red flag warnings, including northwestern Colorado, near Craig, and much of eastern Idaho from Twin Falls to Pocatello and Idaho Falls. All of that for gusty west winds up to 40 miles an hour and low relative humidities. And that brings us to the fire problems. Of course, the big Dragon Bravo fire in the Grand Canyon region. That was yesterday. And yesterday it was upgraded to a mega fire. There are 115,000 acres burning. The original cause is thought to be a lightning strike around July 9th, which grew out of control due to a very windy weather pattern around mid-month. Also, we have the Monroe Canyon wildfire that's south of Richfield. Nearby towns have been evacuated, including Burrville. Today, however, we are picking up some strong southwest flow. It's very hard to tell what's going on underneath, but it looks like a little bit less smoke, so maybe we can take some optimism in that. This is some special satellite imagery from the Sentinel satellite. This was taken on Wednesday, so it's only 2 days old, and this is ultra-high resolution imagery. Look at that, you can zoom right in there. That's probably only a few miles across. So that's one of the fire clusters right there. It's kind of hard for me to tell exactly where the burn scars are. More fires up to the north and pretty extensive smoke plume. But as you can see, the south rim of the Grand Canyon right in here, they are looking pretty good. I don't know if they have that closed off or not. I don't see why they should, unless there's a exceptional fire risk down there too. As we mentioned, a flood watch for northeastern New Mexico. We also have flood watches in effect for the Sacramento Mountains and west central New Mexico through this evening as a monsoon pattern continues. And there it is right now, pretty much centered on the Continental Divide, a little bit drier than what we've seen the past few days. Let's go ahead and jump right in and take a look at those monsoon graphics. What do we see here? 50-degree dew points across Arizona, 40s, El Paso to Albuquerque. And look at that flow. This is the 700 millibar Heights, painting a large subtropical high with, of course, that clockwise flow around it. So that's going to divert a lot of the better tropical moisture a little bit further to the south and bring more of that dry Pacific air into the southwest. Not really an optimal pattern for the monsoon. Let's take that into the weekend. That subtropical high is pretty much locked down over El Paso and Deming. Dew points in Arizona dropping off 25 to 39, 40 there at New Mexico for Saturday. And just continue dry, and that will allow the temperature to gradually come up day by day. And you can see by Tuesday, not much change, 40s, 30s, dew points. So we are heading into a dry spell here. Pretty much the same story all the way through Thursday. Look at that high, just parked right across this area here. And Oklahoma, Texas, getting some of that heat as well. We go towards the end of the period late next week, 50s dew points, starting to get a little bit of moisture from the Gulf of California. That's probably not terribly deep, but maybe enough to generate some showers on the higher elevations. Starting to see some 40s and 50s, so improvement towards the end of next week, maybe some relief by the weekend. This looks like a little tropical storm or something off to the south. That forecast is not likely to be accurate, but it will be something that we'll have to watch. And we see the ridge axis a little bit further to the north. That might open up the moisture just a little bit. So, yeah, slim pickings for the first week or two of August, but gradually, I think the moisture is starting to recover here in about 7-8 days from now. We have an extreme heat watch for the upcoming week from Tuesday to Friday for all of the lower deserts into eastern California. We could see temperatures as high as 117 at Phoenix, Blythe, and Yuma around Thursday and Friday. Phoenix already saw 118 degrees on July 9th, so this is not really going to be anything new, but that's going to add insult to injury. Also on July 10th, they saw an overnight low of 95 degrees at Phoenix. Their all-time record is 97, set back in 2023. And that just makes me wonder if one of these days we're going to see a low in Phoenix of 100. It's amazing to me that people want to live there, but I'm sure the winters are pretty spectacular. No real problems in California. The San Joaquin Valley has returned to the 90s with 100 at Fresno. Downtown Los Angeles expecting 75 this afternoon, pretty much devoid of clouds, except for the usual stratus and stratocumulus offshore with the marine layer. And for the Pacific Northwest, unfortunately, I don't really have much to pass on. Unstable in the interior, in the Bitterroots and the northern Rockies, running a bit on the warm side. 80s from Seattle to Portland down the Willamette Valley, and we saw 90s in the interior, the hot spot, 94 expected at Pasco and at Medford. A few storms in that area as well, around Crater Lake and down into the Siskiyous. We had a dense fog advisory along the Pacific coast earlier this morning. Looks like that's burned off a little bit. That ran from Florence to Quileute. Flood watch is in effect for all of northeastern Washington in the mountains from the Cascades to the Idaho border. Expecting rounds of heavy rain that may cause debris flows, especially around recent wildfire burn scars. And then heading out west into the Pacific, this North Pacific high not very strong. Typically this time of year, we expect to find pressures up near 1032, 1036 millibars, sometimes even 1040. This is way low, and that's partly due to the influence of this very stormy pattern out there in the Gulf of Alaska. There's lower than average thickness values extending pretty far south, so that's probably cutting into the action there on that North Pacific high. Alaska itself looking warm, especially on the North Slope, almost 70 degrees there at Dead Horse, Prudhoe Bay, 68 at Kaktovik. Can't believe I remembered that. And a little wedge of warm sector air out into the Arctic Ocean area. Conditions in the Canadian High Arctic looking pretty typical for this time of year, 30s and 40s. That's about where we would expect to find it this time of year, sometimes 50s. Further south, now we get into the heat. Look at the Northwest Territories up into the 70s. And they do have heat warnings out there. Let me scam call. That was either Car Warranty or Prince Abacha out there in Nigeria. One of the two, probably. Anyway, bad news for central Canada. A large area of heat warnings and wildfire smoke warnings all the way from Yellowknife down into Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and northwestern Ontario. This is more smoke warnings than heat warnings. However, we are expecting temperatures up near 90 degrees, 32 Celsius in central Canada. No problems for the eastern part of the country. The eastern cities looking pretty good. They're under a nice, pleasant, high-pressure area and the Maritime's looking good as well. Well, we spent 15 minutes talking about what's going on right now. We need to look at the technical side and start focusing on that forecast. So let's start out right now. There's that big Bermuda high. We're looking at the Atlantic Basin. Bermuda itself, where is that? I think that's it right there. That's either dirt on my monitor or that's Bermuda. This is the Cape Verde Islands, and there is South America. And we see just a couple of easterly waves, this one approaching the Leeward Islands this evening. And there's not very much going on, really. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, just pretty much nothing. Now, of course, this could change. This is a model forecast. Yeah, there's a little system right there. That'll have to be watched. This is August 10th. So this could develop into something. The fact that it doesn't on the model run does not really mean that it won't. So for the time being, the next week, I don't think we're going to really see anything, but as we go into next week, we will have to watch for things to look more like they normally do in August. So we shall see. Another factor that controls the weather, even this time of year, is the mid-tropospheric flow. Subtropical ridge and subtropical highs all the way from Arizona, El Paso, out towards Florida. There is a weak west-to-east flow across the central and northern states, and a jet stream well up north in western Canada and the Hudson Bay region. We see the Hudson Bay vortex has dissipated, and it's replaced by this progressive flow coming out from the Canadian high Arctic. So going into the weekend, we look for changes, important changes that may affect our weather. And it looks much the same going into early next week. It does look like this upper level low in the Gulf of Alaska crosses into western Canada, but not much effect here in the U.S. A cutoff high in the central part of Canada. That's bad news for their wildfires because that's going to indicate very hot conditions and possibly a dry air mass. This high buckles in across Arizona and pretty much remains in place through much of the week. Very little change on that. Ooh, 600 decameters. That is a rarity. We do see that on very rare occasions, but it is somewhat like a unicorn. And there it is. You can see it, 600 decameters. So we're talking about Thursday. So we are going to see temperatures much above normal. Let me just check where that popped up. Yeah, that was late Wednesday into Thursday. So we are in for some hot weather across the southwest, and then going into the extended next weekend, not this weekend, but next weekend, pretty much the same. The flow becoming a little bit stronger across Canada and the northern tier states. But overall, this is very much like what we tend to see this time of year across the U.S. And let's just drag out those technical charts and get a better look at that 600. So here we are at Wednesday. There's the 597, 600 right there starting to show up. And there it is. 6,000 meters, 600 decameters. So Wednesday, Thursday. Now the model could back off from this. We'll just have to see what happens, but it's pretty rare to even seeing it, painting it in the first place. So we'll watch that and check back in on that for next week. So you've seen it, and now you're a card-carrying member of the 600 Club. Not the 700 Club. That's a totally different subject. But 600 Club, I don't have any swag to send you, but anyway, we'll see where we're at for next week. So what does that mean for temperatures? Let's take a look at those high temperatures. And I've added Area 51 there just for some fun, so you can see what's going on there. There's nobody on YouTube that forecasts for that area, but we do a little bit. And if you are a Patreon supporter, again, I'll add your town, as long as it's not right near an existing city on here. Just leave a comment or send an email, and if you're a supporter, I'll get that added. So let's take a look at the weather for tomorrow. 113 for Phoenix, 113 all in the deserts. Continued cool across the northeastern quarter of the U.S. And then we start getting that warm up on Sunday. And some of that heat creeps into Texas going into next week. Hundreds starting to show up there around Midland and Roswell. So there's Wednesday, 115 for Phoenix, and Thursday should be quite hot in the deserts, up to 116 to 117. 110 there for Las Vegas, and remaining near seasonal normals, maybe a little bit on the warm side in the eastern U.S. And I'm not going to show all of these, but this is just the low temperatures for tomorrow morning. Nice, pleasant 50s up there in the Great Lakes, all the way down towards the Ohio River Valley. 60s and 70s elsewhere. 50s up there in the high deserts, with, of course, 80s and 90s around Phoenix. And I can't include Canadian cities on those maps because that's the National Digital Forecast Database. That's not model data. That's the actual forecast temperatures from each forecast offices blended together. So you're looking at some of the best data there, but we can't extend that into Canada or Mexico. Let's take a look at the forecast for tomorrow. This big old stationary front covering much of the south and the high plains. So we bring this up to peak heating and look at all that precipitation and breakout. Most of that's going to be along that frontal boundary through the deep south, Georgia, Florida, into East Texas. And possibly more storms out here near the southern boundary in Colorado. This will be a kind of a persistent ongoing area for at least a couple of days. We see 80s pushing into much of Georgia and Alabama. Won't quite reach Florida, but we'll get rid of those upper 90s to 100s that we had earlier this week. Extensive rain in the deep south. In the north central U.S., a cool weekend. We're going to be looking for 70s. Iowa, Minnesota through Monday. Nice break of cold weather there. And let's bring this into Sunday. Storms along this boundary out there in the high plains into the area west of I-35. Peak heating, 7 p.m. Sunday. Looks like little MCS there in Kansas. Other cells further down the boundary into the Caprock area. We see 100s developing in the Permian Basin of West Texas up to maybe even 105 at Roswell. And those hot temperatures will continue into next week. Chances of storms continuing up there on the high plains, and cooler temperatures arrive over the weekend in the Pacific Northwest. By Sunday, we're looking for a high of 73 at Seattle and 76 at Portland. For the start of the work week, the hot weather spreads into Texas, 100s into the Caprock region, 103 for Midland. Best chance of rain in the Great Plains on Monday, probably up there in South Dakota and Nebraska. And looks like other activity possible across East Texas. We go into Tuesday. There's the weather maps for that. Just kind of a deep southerly flow in the central U.S. No real big changes on the West Coast in the foreseeable future. And this high pressure is slow to dislodge on the East Coast. But some isentropic lift developing out there in the Mississippi River Valley. We don't depend a whole lot on isentropic diagnostics this time of year because the convective modes are dominant, but still there's enough overrunning and lift just north of that boundary to get some showers and storms going. And there's the rest of the week, pretty much most of our activity up there in the northern plains, and this really starts firming up here late in the week around Friday or Saturday. That could send another push of cold air southward, at least into the central plains, and after that we'll just wait and see. Okay, we ran a little bit long, but there it is, the Friday report. I want to thank our newest supporter, David Rice. I appreciate the contribution, and David S., who increased their pledge. Thank you for that. Also, of course, thanks to our other Patreon supporters who help keep this program going. I hope everybody has a great weekend. Take care, and we'll see you back here on Monday for the private supporter edition of the show, and then on Tuesday for everybody else. Have a great one, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.